Welcome to a circus rigging and safety video on aerial silks. I have with me today Catherine from Community Circus Paisley, who has a lot of experience in working with, teaching and performing on silks. So this is what we're going to get started with today. Catherine, lots of different names for silks. What have you come across?
Fabric, tissue, ribbons and silks. That's
Very
the main
good.
ones I've come across just now.
I think I'm going to stick with silks for today. And so there's lots of different types of silk. There's lots of different sorts of things that we can think about when we're selecting our silks. So tell us a little bit about the different types of silks and the uses that you can put them to.
Yeah. So basically, a lot of people when they're starting buying their silks, they buy it by colour, right? They don't think about the other properties the silks have, but they should be considering what they're buying based on their experience, what they're going to use it for, right? Some silks have got virtually no stretch in them. Some silks have no stretch lengthwise, but have 100% stretch widthwise. Some silks have virtually 5, 10, 15% stretch downwards, but very little stretch outwards. So depending on whether they're a beginner and they're wanting to learn to climb. So if you're wanting to try and climb and you start off on stretchy silks, you're going to get put off really quickly. You're 10 climbs and you're still hardly off the floor. Whereas an experienced person, no problem to them. If you are an experienced person, you're going to be doing big drops, then you might want more stretch in your fabric. So you're looking at the stretch, you're looking at the direction of stretch, and you're looking at your experience and what purpose you're using it for and what you're hanging it from. If you're hanging your silks from a dead hang, i.e. straight on to a point, then there's no give from that point. If you're hanging it from a pulley system, then there's going to be some give from that. So that has to be taken into account as well. So you've got to look at what you want to use it for, the amount of experience you've got, and everything you're going to be doing on it.
Very good. So different sorts of uses that we've got there. So we've got for beginners. What about doubles?
Again, so for doubles, you'll find that silks that have less stretch in them have a lower working load limit. Now, the working load limit, as far as I'm aware, is taken on a single strand. So when you look at something with a working load limit of 95 kilograms, for example, then that's 95 on each side. So that's, 190 if you take the two together. If you've got something that's 125 kilograms, you're up to 250 if you're using both strands. However, you don't always use both strands.
You almost never use, as soon as you split them at one time or another, you're hanging from one half.
Exactly. So if you take something at 95 kilograms with very little stretch in it, that wouldn't be suitable for doubles, unless it's two tiny little tots that you're putting on them.
Yeah, so you want to keep that the sum total of the weight of the two performers below that 95 kilos.
100%. Because the manufacturers, they've done all the calculations for you. They know what their minimum braking load and minimum braking strength is, and they've worked out the factor of safety based on the amount of force that you can exert on their silks. So they tell you, because it can get quite confusing, because if you worked on it, if you look at the recommendations, the factor of safety for material should be 7:1. Now, some manufacturers, because there's virtually no downward stretch in their silks, they've actually increased that to like 15:1. So you can't just take that 7:1 and assume it. Go with their calculations, go with their working load limits.
Yeah, so for any given trick, if we're looking at the forces we apply, there's certain characteristics in the silk which would have to go into those calculations.
100%.
So we'd have to have a really good understanding of physics and materials to be able to work that out for ourselves.
We would.
So what are the different factors that are taken into account by the manufacturers about applying forces to silks?
So if you're looking at the force that you're exerting, it's not just your weight that they're taking into account. You've got to look at the distance you're dropping, and you've got to look at the deceleration, so it's dropping distance.
What causes the deceleration?
The stretch in the silks.
Yeah.
So when you land in that trick, if your landing is spread over a period, so you're decelerating as opposed to stopping, which you would be in a no-stretch silk.
Yeah, the shock force is lower because of the stretch.
Absolutely. So they're looking at that, and then they're working out what is the safe load for you to put onto that silk.
Based on the use of what we're doing with silks overall.
Absolutely.
So, however, if we're going to take those silks and do something completely unexpected, then perhaps that's either a case of contacting the manufacturer or having someone who has that kind of knowledge to do those sorts of calculations.
Absolutely.
Very good. Okay, great. So when we're looking to buy our silks in the first place, obviously length is a consideration. So what sort of calculations would we apply as far as length is concerned?
So when you're actually buying your silks, you've got to check with the manufacturer. Some of them actually sell usable length, which is the doubled up length that you're going to require for the 2 strands, and others sell the total length. You've got to calculate it to allow a minimum of 1 metre in the ground, and I'll come back to that, and 1 metre for actually the knot that you're going to use to rig it to the attachment. If you are in a lower height, you're going to need much more than 1 metre on the ground. So you're going to need a minimum of 2 metres, probably 3 metres if you've got a very low ceiling.
That's 1 metre on each side?
Yes, yep. So you'll be actually taking the length of your equipment, adding 1 metre for the top, and 1 metre for stuff tail in the ground. So you're probably going to add 2 to 3 metres onto the length you require.
Okay, and of course, if it's particularly low, if you want to be able to do all the wraps, then you need much more than 2 to 3 metres
so
on the ground.
you have to work that out for your length that you buy. Yep.
Very good. So there's a couple of other considerations that we're looking at when we're talking about how we're going to apply it, and some of those are to do with the thickness of the silk.
Yes.
How will that make a difference to?
Well, so grip strength. So if you've got a lot of children in the class, they've got tiny little hands, or if you're an adult with small hands, then obviously the thicker material, which is more bouncy, can be much thicker to hold. So you need a wider grip for it. So you might want to look at it and think, well, actually, if that one's knitted and it's not a tricot warp, then it's going to be too thick to grab hold of. You've got to look at it that way. And then again, obviously look at it. You might be teaching, say in a children's class, you might be teaching them to sit in a knot and pull it into a big wide hammock and wrap themselves in it. So you want one that can stretch widthways, not just lengthways. So that's the type of things that you're taking into consideration. It's not just the stopping distance for the force that you're looking at.